Greetings to all the kings, queens, sultans, doges, steppe warlords, and especially the one guy desperately trying to convince his friends not to quit EU5 after their nation got cooked on day 2. EU5 throws 20 pop-ups, 4 rebel factions, and an economic crisis at you before you even unpause. I get it. I'm Throbby with Large Lads, and I'm here to make sure your first campaign doesn't end in emotional damage and national bankruptcy. These 5 nations are beginner-friendly, strong, and actually fun to play. Before we get started, if you like management games, please go check out our game, Winterreach Emporium, in the description. It's a cozy shopkeeper game coming out early 2026. Without further ado, let's get into the list. Alright, so the first country I want to talk about is Sweden. Sweden is my, I would say, top 2 country as far as personal preference goes to play. I really enjoyed Sweden in EU4, but in EU5, it doesn't start as a personal union. It actually starts in a good situation. It has relatively weak neighbors with Novgorod and Norway. It starts with a vassal of Scania and has Norway as a personal union. Sweden's starting population is 760,000 with 6,500 levies, a 24 gold tax base. Unfortunately, it does have a very weak ruler stats-wise, and it has an okay amount of country events. That's another reason why it's low. It doesn't have the most country events, so we are going to put a little bit lower because there's just not as much flavor. The big things about Sweden are A, its neighbors. Not exactly the strongest. Novgorod is really easy to attack early. Scania is your vassal. Norway is under you, and Denmark can be a tough cookie, but Denmark's not particularly strong at the start, so you can kind of interact around that, and they always have to cross the strait, so as long as you get your army to Helsingborg, you can kind of just always hold that. Sweden is also very rich in resources. They have tons of lumber, tons of iron, copper, a good amount of wheat, lots of wool, marble, fish, basically everything that you need to have your functioning empire and actually build your country up. The only thing you want to watch out for with Sweden is during the winter you will go in a food deficit, as most of your country actually has a harsh winter. So as far as learning the game, Sweden is really good because it teaches you how to handle subjects and personal unions and eventually integrate them into your land. This is really easy. Scania is basically annexable from the start, and Norway you'll understand how to use the union mechanics. As previously stated, for learning, it is much easier to fight weaker neighbors to learn the war mechanics. You really can't lose to Novgorod. They're very weak at the start. Once you beat Novgorod, you can push into Livonia, you can annex Norway, you can annex Scania, maybe wait for Denmark to get into a war with some HRE countries and beat Denmark as well. Another interesting thing about Sweden, all this land to the north is not owned by any country, and you can use colonial charters. This kind of gives you a chance to use the colonial system in a local level and kind of understand exactly how it works. Other kind of fun factor reasons you should play this, it gives you a really classic power arc. You start respectable, you learn the game safely, then you become a regional heavyweight, and you can really dominate the Baltic area. I would rank it number 5 because the early game is controlled and not exactly 100% easy because Denmark can be a tough fight, but the other neighbors are very easy and you have good allies around you. I would say that it's a little less explosive than some of the nations coming up, but it is really satisfying to grow Sweden into a superpower. All right, and number 4, it is Naples. So Naples, much like Sweden, is a very good starter nation. Big reasons are you're kind of insulated in Italy. There's not a lot of really strong countries surrounding you that you'll have to fight on land. You do have the Papal States that you may have to worry about. But aside from that, it's all minors. Sicily's somebody you can attack, and then also you can kind of make a push over to Greece and Northern Africa. This is a much more relaxed game than most countries that you'll play, and you also start with a strong economy, a very high population, and about 28,000 levies. Other things to know about Naples, Naples basically has its own trade market. This is really helpful with learning how the trade systems work and kind of just using one market. It's a lot less to manage. Another great thing about Naples is it introduces you to the Italian politics. You'll have to contend with the Catholic Church, the Neapolitan Provincial Union, and I know I'm mispronouncing this, but you will also be a part of the Guelphs. Sorry, I don't know how to say that, but it's basically all of the Italian states that are aligned with Italy and the Pope. The only real downsides about Naples are you can't really attack the Pope without everybody hating you, and their raw materials are not great. You only have, I think, one iron node in range, but you do have lots of food nodes, so I guess that is kind of an upside. Overall, I would say that Naples is number 4 because it is really easy to start. It has a very good economy, it has a pretty strong military, and it has pretty good progression into the game where you can become 2 Sicilies and then Italy. So my number 4 is Naples. All right, number 3 is England. I think England is one of the strongest starts in the game, but also of the 5 here, it is probably the hardest to play. You start with King Edward III Plantagenet. He is a really good ruler and a really good general. You start with a large population, a great economy, and huge levies. Not to mention, your country also has 233 dynamic historical events at the start, so there's tons of flavor for England. Big things about England to note, you basically have every single resource in the game, tons of population, tons of money. You're safe on an island. It gives you opportunities to beat up on smaller neighbors, being in Wales, Ireland, and Scotland. It gives you opportunities to use vassal mechanics and dominion mechanics. It'll give you the opportunity to learn navy. Also, later on, you'll have the opportunity to colonize. This is probably the best nation for learning every facet of the game. You will literally learn every facet of the game as England. And that's really why it's on this list, because this list isn't for easiest starts. It's more for learning the game. The only real downside to England is you will be called into war frequently against France. France will probably attack you, or at least they did in my save, regularly. And they generally are going to have twice your levies. Your allies really also don't do a very good job at helping. But being that France is basically made up entirely of vassals, you actually can win these wars despite being down huge in numbers. And worst case scenario, if you can't, just give up your provinces in France and you still can play a really strong island England game. I'm ranking it number 3 and not higher because I do think that for new players, the wars with France can be really tough. But aside from that, everything about England is actually perfect. I just think that is a really big downside, especially if it's the first game of EU5 that you've played. You might not actually be able to beat France. But if it's your second game or third game, you probably can handle it. So, again, the Kingdom of England is my number 3. Number 4 is the Ottomans. So when you first look at the map, the Ottomans have a pretty small country, and it might shock you if you haven't played EU4 that the Ottomans are a really good country to play. They start with a really strong ruler, a smaller population, not a huge tax base, and a smaller army size. So why are the Ottomans so strong? Well, the Ottomans are so strong because it is really easy to take over all of the neighbors in Anatolia and easily consolidate the area. Here there's tons of resources, basically every resource you'll need, and you start in the Constantinople market, which is very valuable. You start next to the weak Byzantine Empire, and it's actually pretty easy to conquer Constantinople earlier than historically. Once you consolidate Anatolia and move your capital to Constantinople, you are a regional superpower. Your army is huge, your gold is vast, and your resources are deep. You control one of the strongest trade nodes, and you get different events, such as the Rise of the Turks, to help you along the way. Also, you start with 3 cabinet members, and it's easily expandable up to 4. Only 2 downsides of the Ottomans are you start near the Mamluks, which can prove to be an early adversary, and it doesn't really offer much in terms of colonial expansion. So that's just one mechanic that you won't get to touch on. But for a beginner, this is a really strong playthrough. Maybe actually the easiest in the game. All right, and number 1 is the Crown of Castile. This is tied with Sweden as my favorite nation to play in EU5 and was one of my favorite nations to play also in EU4. You start out with Alfonso VI, the Avenger. He is a pretty good ruler. You start with 5.5 million population, a very large tax base, and a very large army, as well as lots of country events. So what's so good about Castile? Well, other than your massive army, you start out next to all smaller nations. Aragon, Portugal, Morocco, Granada are all easy to defeat. France starts out very weak and can also be an ally. You can look to form the nation of Spain, ally Portugal early, and maintain positive papal relations. Complete the Reconquista, and expand into northern Africa. I think Castile is the perfect low floor, high ceiling country. Basically, you can't mess it up, and the sky is the limit. You can colonize all of the New World, you can take over the Italian peninsula and the lowlands. You can dive into diplomacy, expansion, trade, religion, colonization, and personal unions very easily as this nation. Forming Spain is smooth and thematic and satisfying every time. This is the easiest learn the game and be powerful while you're doing it nation. As far as resources, obviously you have every single resource you could hope for, and you can expand and get any resources that you don't have. These are all the reasons why Castile is the #1 nation to play. Alright guys, if you enjoyed that video, please like, comment, subscribe. It is a huge help. Please let me know in the comments what nations you want to play, what nations you have played, and what your favorite nations are to play. And don't forget to check out Winter Reach Emporium in the description. Thanks guys.